Back Before the Moon by S. Omar Barker. On a little meadow slope in the hidden valley that lies behind the black woods of the upper Vallecito stands a great cross built of red stone. This is in the Rio Arriba County of New Mexico, where all the world is still outside, and where there are said to be strange sights every night of a moon for those with eyes to see them. Here, then, is how Redstone Cross came to be. If you had seen it, you would want to know. An old Alboreal Baldonado, a graybeard, squatting in the sun beside his adobe and cañoncito, would tell you, as he told me. Elio Jaramillo came riding down out of the black woods from the Valle Escondido, and all the little cañons ran belly-deep in snow water to stop him. The river itself, modest and clear-eyed in summer, now boomed through its red-stone box like the wrath of Mia Tia Dios, and then swung violently into the three-cornered cove where Elgio would have to cross it. Without warning, a great pine came swooping down across his path. His pony reared and swung around in a futile struggle back up the hill. Elio's eyes widened in sudden alarm. But then the deeper fear that drove him down the sweeping slopes of the mountain returned to his eyes. He jerked his caballito back down the hill, spurred him flounder around the fallen trees and on again, down the slippery trail to the river, which snaked deep down the steep canyon, coils 10 deep and 50 feet from the edge to edge. He could not hope to cross the river, yet he would have to. Back in the squat cabin with a flat dirt roof on a long grass slopes tipped in the sun, lone homesteader of the hidden valley, Ursulinda lay in a fever. Ursulinda, his little brown-eyed angel, whose tears could half break his heart and bring his rough face down against her cheek. Ursulinda, at 8 years already, the image of La Masidra Cuerda, the dear little lost mother who had left them to be with her Tata Dios. Elio had left her, dying perhaps, with 2 brothers. They were good brown mountain lads who knew what the sheep were saying when they cried out at night, and who did not mind talking to the mountains alone in the moonlight, but who would run and hide when a stranger would appear in the valle. The 2 boys were with her. One, Toribio, would be down on his knees asking God to leave her with them. The other, Juanito, would be holding fast to her hand. Elio battled down through the black woods to the Vasitos, with the whip of fear lashing him from behind, and one tiny hope to lead him. One little Cruz de Jesus, a wooden crucifix on the altar in the church of the village, the cross that had cured Marquero Romero from the fever, said Jose Adan, at the time of a doomed spring in Valle Alamoso. If only Padre Onesimo would give him that crucifix. If only he could fight his way back to Ursulinda before the red moon turned white over the tops of the firs, and the coyotes came out talking their queer way on the hilltops. There was a doctor in the village, too. Old Partrenu, with his black bag and half-white whiskers. Elio would see him for medicine, but after all, what could one hope from a mere medicio in such a case? 3 days ago, Toribio had come crying to the cabin, and sure enough, when Elio went out with him, there was old Chongo, the biggest goat on a stump inside the corral, standing upright like a man and preaching to his flock. They could hear strange words beyond understanding when the Sachango saw them, then coming in there with a sudden red fire circle around him. As it died away, the old goat leaped down from the herd and sang "Bah!" in his own language again. A puff of heat came blowing past their ears that could only have been the breath of the very devil. That night, Juanito saw a great wolf go flying out of the trees the way a lost soul would fly. When the goat appeared against the white moon, there was a blue fire in his mouth, and he dropped down suddenly and stood howling on a rock at the top of the hill. When that night was halfway into dawn, the coyotes, slim wolf brothers of El Dominio, the demons, sat on the hill and began mad fandango to drive back the sun. Over across the valley, one answered the call from another world. Elio knew the voice, and it said, Earthlinda, Earthlinda, over and over again. He lay in bed listening. He heard his little daughter moan softly in her sleep, but when he muttered a swift Ave Maria, she was silent again, and outside the two coyotes went yip-yipping back to the woods. That morning, Ursulinda rose a little quieter, yet well and clear-eyed, but another mother goat was dead on her knees in the corral. When the boys had milked the others and Ursulinda drank the milk, moon whiteness came over her face, and the fever began to take her again. Juanito looked in her cup, and sure enough, there, for a second, was the outline of a face marked in blue pinpoint bubbles of the milk. It was the devil's spring and the devil's fever that had come to Valle Escondido. El Hijo Jaramillo rode out of the Black Hills for a token of our Savior that would save his daughter, if not from death, at least from El Diablo, who would take her very soul away. The river was a monster across his path. It swished down in a canyon in a swift current, so that every wave arched its back and leaped to keep its fellows like the wolf anxious to be in at the killing. Although the muddy river knew it would be death, he urged the black horse to the river's edge. Black Choto groaned, but stepped into the torrent, for he knew his master. 2 steps brought his head into the waves. The horse drew death when he saw it, and he saw it then, but it was not close to that huge and desperate pawing of water that did not bring him streaming and quaking back to the bank. Elio's heart was a second without beating, for he knew that Choto could not carry him across. Yet he must cross. 20 steps above, where the water came tearing out of the box canyon, it was narrower. At the edge of the bank, the curled fingers of the flood clutched at the roots of a tall blue pine. If he had an axe, he could chop it, and it might swish down and catch on the other bank, for the tree was long enough. But Elio had left the valley in half a stupor and dread for his soul, and had not been foreminded. He tried pushing the tree. It swayed a little, for the water had loosened its roots, but it did not fall. A dozen little stones and a single block of black earth, where he disturbed the anchor of the tree, tumbled into the stream, but no more. The black horse stood like a slim statue back a bit from the bank, and Elio looked at him without hope. Then suddenly he was at the saddle, unbuckling the lasso that always hung there. It was a long rope, light and tough, the way that cowboys like. Elio could throw it too, and with a swish that would fetch up whatever he caught in a quick surprise. Now, it was no running horse he must rope, but the snag roots of a big log lying in clusters of dead snakes across the rio. He threw it with all his might, and the slim string of the rope flew clear across the water. But it did not catch, but it was long enough. It dropped into the water and dragged down the stream, but Elio pulled at it swiftly, and a spark of hope came into his heart. Now he could cross the river. It remained for him to throw the rope swiftly and surely. And he did. The 3rd time the questing loop caught a stout snag and held, when the middle bellowed like a strong tug of the raging water. He tied Black Choto to a bush back in the bank to await the return for La Cruz Salvadora before the moon would rise. Then he crept into the water, knotting his hands in the rope and fighting that giant 1,000 times his strength with the muscles of a man and the heart of a leon. Elio had come down out of the black woods where Lobo Diablo, a devil wolf, had flown across the moon, and he was going down to the Valsitos for a cross of Jesus to save the child that was his other heart, and he had crossed the river because... On a steep bank in safety, he heard the soft sound of a woo behind him. He looked back, half in terror. It was the Blawpoo pine that was swaying down over the river. It came softly to rest, its upper branches on a gray boulder across the river, so that its trunk and its stout bristled bridge over the water that a man might cross, if only Elio had waited. But now he was over. With coiled rope around his dripping shoulders, he was on his way down the wild curved road. Now he would run in the mud for a few miles distance to the chapel, as he would be back across the pine tree bridge before the moon. Jesus adorado. Elio ran like the cursing old river itself, but here there had been more sun on the road. But as he went, dodging the black bog holes and talking a prayer to the god Jesus, there was a voice that muttered in little canyons and a soft sound of doom in the wind. And the black hills talked behind it. It was where the slanting road comes down to the river, and a helpless old trail crawls to the west edge of the water, that his tired legs pulled him down to rest. And it was when he dropped his head in his leathered hands for a dead still moment that he heard the voice that called from over the river, the voice that had called across the water. Amigo! Amigo! It was a strange sound. Elio looked in wonder. Who could be calling from the old trail? What would the poor sheepman see? Leaning against the white trunk of a fallen tree, holding himself up with his arms out on two branches, as though he might be Christ on the cross, was a long-haired man with a curly brown beard on his face, and black woods behind him. Elio had not yet closed his mouth from surprise when the man stepped down to the brink of the rapid water, called again. Amigo, help me across the water. I cannot pass it alone. Elio saw that there was a stain of red, like blood, on his blue rag jacket, and remembered how he had heard the old hermit, digger of the mines, who was like standing on his head half the day because of the crazy he was. So Elio called to him that he could not cross that torrent, worse here than above, for it was only a crazy miner, and Elio must be running down the road to the village. Your rope! Throw me your rope! The old man called out, now more intensely. But Elio was going again, and would leave there, but who would stop to help the old fool drown? He looked back over his shoulder, for his heart stopped for a second with his legs. The old man was wading in, arms over his head. He would be lost. Let him drown. Elio had battled to come down this far to the Cruz de Jesus, and he must go on. But in his heart now he felt that it was only one world, and one man in it, the crazy old man waiting out to go down in the flood, and only Elio could save him. The hawk did not flick his wing more quickly than Elio pulled his rope coils from his shoulder, ran back, and whistled a strong magnancy across the water. The leap lined over the old man, and when he was strangling down in the flood, Elio caught the rope and turned around a stout white aspen and pulled him up again. It was one hombrecito against the whole weight of another, and the long muscled water besides, and there was death in it for both one or both if Elio should slip, for he had the rope around his hand, an arm like a snake. Elio pulled and hauled and cursed like a madman, but an old minero gurgled and fought the water, then went dead on the rope until a whirl caught and swung him past the middle. Elio pulled him on the bank like a dead trout, but the old man was not dead. There were 2 long, lost hours the sheepman was working with him until he stood again. Now he would be too late to get back to Esolina. He tried to run on now, but the minero picked him up by the sleeve and said, "Where you go, my friend? And why do I see shadows in the black woods in your eyes?" Elio wanted to hurry away, but now he must stay and tell the old man what he asked, for there was no end to the look in his eyes. He did tell him, even how Shango had preached to the flock of the valley, how he had come fighting across the river. The minero gave him a look, like the look of a clear blue sky, and said, "Who shall say that the little roots are only growing for wild grass, or that the uphill is not down to the one who understands?" Even before he had finished, Elio was off again, down the rough road to the village. Late, but with half of fear shadow gone from his black eyes, and not knowing why. At the beginning of the evening, Elio came over the last hill with the gray sage clumps about him, and looked up upon the village down by the river where he could find the chapel and the holy crucifix. A blackness rushed back into his heart when he looked, for the long digging arms of the water had crept out and clutched the old chapel, and the sun-baked mud in its walls was crumbling into the flood. As he ran crying down the hill, the last front wall of the great cross upon it tumbled into the water, and all God-fearing people of the Valecitos stood groaning and watching it. All but the good Padre Onesimo, for his body was already somewhere down the river, and his soul flying up to the Tata Dios. Elio Jaramillo had come down out of the black woods by talking wolves for the Cruz de Jesus to save his daughter, but the black water was there before him. Even the good padre, who might have known the holy words to say the making matter cross, was gone. Padre, who might have known the holy words to say for making another cross, was gone. Elio took back a useless medicine of the old Panturo, yet he was now without hope. How could a little red bottle of white pills save a girl when there was a blue fire in the mouth of a flying wolf across the moon? Now he must go back through the black woods to bury his dead, and his heart with her under the black earth. He had lost 2 hours fighting the river for the crazy digger of mines, and the avenging water had been that long before him at the chapel. There was only one word in the woods as he climbed back toward the valle, and that was the shouting of the word of the river in the canyon. Elio crossed the pine tree bridge that had fallen for him. The water was singing a wild song beneath him. Now he would step down to die in it, but he must not, for the dead must be buried. Black Choto was there by the foot of the hill with a strange, joyful voice welcoming his master, who had no ears for the sound of the poor horse's gladness. It was slow up the mountain. The moon was white and going west over the black firs when Elio topped the hill where the little coyotes should be out talking their queer way in the night. But there was no voice in the woods. It was slow going up the mountain. The moon was white and going west over the black firs when Elio topped the hill where the little coyotes should be out talking their queer way in the night. But there was no voice in the woods. The poor sheepman understood the silence of death in the valley. For why should a devil wolf be howling now that Elio was coming back with empty hands? Too late. When he rode in the valley with the black cabin up on the sunny ridge of it, there was a cry from the marsh by the road, and when Elio looked, it was the old El Minero again, deep in a bank of the melting snow of spring, and calling, "Amigo, friend, throw me your rope, throw me your rope!" Elio would kill him now, for his heart was black with grief. Yet he did not. Again it was in his heart that there was but one world and one man in it, and that was the old man dying there in the moonlight snow. He looped him again with the rope he threw the same sure way, and pulled him out flat where the snow was hard. But he did not raise him up, for now he must ride up a hill to kiss the dead lips of his Linda. Ay, Jesus. But it was the boy Torbillo that ran out when Elio came to the cabin. But it was Elislinda, the little brown sister of the angels, who stood in the light of the open door and called to him, her voice singing into his poor heart like the joy of a day that never was. How could a man listen to his boy telling him something until Ursulinda was in his arms and her face against his? For they must now tell the strange miner man with the beard, and with the look of the blue sky in his eyes and the red stains of blood on his jacket, had come wordlessly into the cabin with clear grasses on his brow. And when Ursulinda drank the red drink the stranger brought from her from beneath his jacket, her fever left her, and they, falling on their knees at her bed, did not see him leave. It was a quiet moonlight that Ergio Jaramillo went quickly searching down the valley for El Minero he had left dying in the snow. But the only thing he found was a print where his clothes had stained the snow like a blood-red cross. Here's the holy calm that follows springtime, where Ergio Jaramillo has built the red stone cross in the Valle Escondido in honor of the holy Jesus, and the little coyotes talk their queer, quiet way at night.